some stories stay with you. The ones that make you glance over your shoulder, check the doors locked a second time, or laugh a little too loudly in the dark. That's the world of Kill Me Maybe. Every month, hosts Mac and Des unravel true crime, strange mysteries, and eerie tales that linger long after the episode ends. They're the ghouls next door, not detectives, but sharp enough to ask the questions and cheeky enough to keep it fun. Spooky season never ends here. Subscribe to Kill Me Maybe wherever you get your podcasts. Mac and Des are waiting, and you don't want to keep them waiting.
Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that Down the Crooked Path is researched and recorded in Niagara Falls, Ontario, on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Attawandaron, and the Mississauga of Credit First. This land has been home to Indigenous peoples for thousands of years, and we recognize their enduring connection. We are grateful to share these stories on their lands that carry their histories, and we encourage our listeners to reflect on the past, present, and future. Welcome, wanderers, to Journey Down the Crooked Path, a place where the stories are stranger, the shadows stretch longer, and the things that go bump in the night might just be listening. I'm Amanda Joy, your guide into the eerie, the forgotten, and the downright bizarre. Here, we step off the well-lit roads of Canadian Creepies and venture into the murky corners of history, folklore, and the unexplained, where the whispers grow louder and the truth is never quite what it seems. So let's take a deep breath, watch your step, and whatever you do, don't look back. Once you start down the crooked path, you never know what might follow. There's something about old covenants that is unsettling. Maybe it's the silence, too complete, or the rows of empty pews where devotion once echoed but now only dust remains. In New Brunswick, one such place sits cloaked in forest shadows, its stone walls weathered by time and secrets. Visitors speak of an atmosphere that presses down on the chest, a weight not born of gravity, but of something unseen. The air feels colder there, even in summer, and always there's a sense that you're not alone. What unsettles people isn't just the building or how remote it is. It's what they've heard about it. The whispers of a nun who walks without a head, her presence felt more than seen. Locals describe fleeting glimpses, a black habit vanishing behind a tree, a flicker of movement in a chapel window long after the building was abandoned. Skeptics scoff, but even they admit there's something off, something that makes you glance over your shoulder, something that makes you leave before the sun sets. In the historic patchwork of New Brunswick and Quebec, certain locations carry more than just the weight of geography. They hold stories that blur the line between documented events and whispered legends. French Fort Cove is one of them. Depending on who's telling the story, its origins trace back to either the dense forests of New Brunswick or the insulated covenants of Quebec. Both regions, steeped in colonial tension and religious zeal, offer fertile ground for tales of mystery and disappearance. But to understand the roots of this legend, one must first step into the world of 18th century French Catholic missions, a world shaped by devotion, diplomacy, and the quiet power of women in wimples. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, French Catholic orders played a pivotal role in the colonization of New France. Missionaries arrived not only to spread faith, but to establish footholds in a contested land. Amongst the most influential were the Ursuline and the Grey Nuns, women's religious communities that took on the dual mantle of educators and caregivers. The Ursulines, founded in Quebec City in 1639, were among the first to offer formal education to girls, including Indigenous children. The Grey Nuns, meanwhile, extended their reach into healthcare, tending to the sick and poor in remote settlements where no other aid existed. These orders operated with quiet strength, often in harsh conditions, and became the moral and social backbone of many communities. But their work unfolded against a backdrop of escalating conflict. The colonial landscape was anything but stable. French settlers, British colonists, and indigenous nations vied for control, each with their own allegiances and grievances. Treaties were signed and broken, land was claimed and reclaimed, and in the midst of it all, religious missions became both sanctuaries and strategic assets, places where culture, politics, and faith collided. After the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, France was forced to cede much of its territory of present-day Nova Scotia to Britain. The French colony of Acadia, predominantly Catholic and deeply rooted in the land, was fractured. Many Acadians fled northward into what is now New Brunswick, seeking refuge from British rule and hoping to preserve their way of life. Over the following decades, tensions escalated. Protestant British settlers moved into Nova Scotia, often clashing with the Catholic Acadian population. These frictions erupted into open conflict in 1749 with Father Le Loutren's War, a brutal struggle for control of the region. By the end of the war, Britain had secured dominance and initiated the expulsion of the Acadians. More than 10,000 were deported to the American colonies or back to France. Over half perished during the journey, victims of starvation, disease, and shipwrecks. Yet, around 2,000 Acadians evaded capture, retreating into the dense forests and the remote inlets of New Brunswick, hoping to remain unseen. It was during this unpredictable period that a modest French military outpost was constructed at a small inlet along the Miramichi River in what is now Northumberland County. Later known as French Fort Cove, this site was chosen for its strategic location, shielded by forest, close to the river's mouth, and connected by water routes to other French settlements. Though the fort itself was small, its purpose was vital. It served as a defense position against British incursions and a sanctuary for Acadian families who had survived the expulsion. This convergence of displaced people, religious borders, and military urgency created a charged and fragile atmosphere. The missions nearby, already strained by war and isolation, struggled to maintain order. Records were sparse, identities often blurred, and disappearances, whether due to violence, illness, or the unforgiving terrain, frequently went uninvestigated. Rumors spread, and in the silence that followed, the land seemed to hold on to the stories of those who vanished. It is here in the thick woods and the quiet waters of French Fort Cove that our story begins. The nuns who served this region were not isolated away in stone chapels or hidden behind convent walls. Their days were spent walking the uneven paths between settlements, tending to the sick with poultices and prayer, teaching children to read and write both French and Latin, and offering comfort to the dying. They carried satchels filled with herbs, bandages, and scripture, tools of healing and hope. At the cove, they established a modest outpost, a place where travelers would rest, where the wounds could recover, and where teaching of the church were quietly passed on. Their work was tireless and thankless, and deeply embedded into the fabric of the frontier life. Disappearances were rare, but not unheard of. A sister might leave for a nearby settlement and never arrive. Another might be found days later, collapsed from exposure, her satchel full of supplies still. The dangers were many: bandits, soldiers, illness, and the unforgiving terrain. There were no formal investigations. A missing nun was a tragedy, but not a scandal. Her name would be quietly removed from the mission ledger, her belongings redistributed, and her absence folded into the rhythm of survival. The cove itself became kind of a threshold, a place where the known world ended and uncertainty began. Some locals believed that the land swallowed those who walked it alone. Others blamed deserters, raiders, or the harsh winters that came early and stayed late. But among the sisters, there was a quiet understanding. The work was sacred, but it was not safe, and the cove, beautiful as it was, had never promised full protection. Among the women who served at the cove, Sister Marie distinguished herself by her determination rather than by rank or reputation. Born in the Loire Valley of France, Marie was the daughter of a modest apothecary and a school teacher. Her early years were shaped by books, herbs, and quiet acts of service. She entered the church at 17 not out of obligation but conviction. While others sought spiritual retreat, Marie sought purpose. She studied medicine alongside scripture, and when word reached her of the suffering in the colonies, of displaced Acadians, of families torn apart by war, she petitioned her superiors directly. Her request was simple: send me to Canada. It was not a common choice. The missions were harsh, the travel unforgiving, and the political tensions capricious. But Marie was insistent. She arrived in New Brunswick in the spring of 1756, assigned to the outpost near French Fort Cove. There, she worked tirelessly, teaching children in makeshift classrooms, treating fevers with poultices she prepared herself, and walking miles between settlements to reach those who were too sick to travel. She kept a journal, though few pages survived. What remains speaks of long days, cold nights, and a deep love for the people she served. "The land is quiet," she once wrote, "but the suffering is loud. I must listen to both." At the Cove, Sister Marie's role was both practical and deeply personal. She served as a teacher to children of displaced Acadians, guiding them through scripture, language, and basic arithmetic in cramped candlelit rooms. Her training in herbal medicine made her a capable healer, treating fevers, wounds, and the lingering effects of malnutrition with steady hands and tenacity. Above all, she was a caretaker. She sat with the dying when no one else would, wrote letters for the illiterate, and watched through the long nights when the fort was restless with fear. Her role was integral to the operation rather than merely decorative. Sister Marie was beloved by all who knew her. In a time where trust was scarce and survival uncertain, she became a pillar of quiet leadership. Families turned to her not only for healing and guidance, but for hope. With the help of a few elders, she organized a modest community fund, built from small donations of coins, cloth, and preserved goods, to support those who needed it most. It was never spoken of publicly, but everybody knew. If the worst came, Sister Marie would know what to do. And unfortunately, the worst came sooner than anyone expected. Word reached the Cove that British forces had learned of their presence. Scouts had been spotted upriver. The fragile peace that had held for months was beginning to crack. Fear spread quickly through the settlement. The Acadian families, many of whom had already lost everything once before, knew what was coming. Homes would be searched, possessions seized, and lives uprooted again. In a quiet gathering beneath the chapel, the community made a decision. They collected what little they had left: gold rings passed down through generations, silver crucifixes, heirloom brooches, and the remaining coins from the fund, and entrusted them to Sister Marie. She accepted the responsibility without ceremony, only a nod and a whispered prayer. That night, under the cover of darkness, she buried the items in a place known only to her. No map was drawn, no marker left. It was a gesture of protection, of faith, and of defiance. If the British came, they would find nothing but empty hands and quiet determination. Several days later, under the cover of night, Sister Marie was returning from a nearby home where she had delivered medicine to a sick child. The path she took wound through the wood, stretching near the edge of the cove, quiet, familiar, and usually safe. But that night, she was not alone. She was confronted by a group of men, strangers to the settlement, armed and demanding. One stepped forward, brandishing a sword, and demanded she reveal the location of the valuables that she had hidden. Sister Marie refused. She stood her ground, even when they struck her, even as she cried out for help. Her silence was unwavering. Realizing she would not speak, the men turned brutal. One restrained her while another raised a sword and delivered a fatal blow, decapitating her in the dark silence of the woods. Her cries reached nearby homes, and several residents rushed towards the sound. But by the time they arrived, the attackers had vanished into the trees. All that remained was Sister Marie's lifeless body, collapsed near the edge of the path she had walked so many times to serve others. In the days that followed, the community searched desperately. They combed the shorelines, examined the lake, and scoured the woods, hoping to recover what had been taken. But her head was never found.
Once upon a time, in the land of everyday moments, there lived a sprinkle of magic called icing sugar photography. From sticky cake smash smiles to wind-swept yes moments, they capture the sugar-sweet, the beautifully messy, and everything in between. Whether you're a blushing bride or a blooming family, or just want to freeze time for a second, Icing Sugar Photography is your fairy god lens. Visit icingsugarphotography.com and follow along on Instagram at icingsugarphoto. Let your story sparkle, because life is sweet and memories should be too. You. Yeah, you. Still haunting the same old fast fashion? Time to dig up something better with Back from the Dead Goods, a Canadian small business where forgotten threads get a second life and sustainability meets spooky. This isn't just upcycled clothing. It's resurrected fashion with an eerie edge. Handpicked, reworked, and revived, every piece is as unique as a ghost story whispered at midnight. And because you're a part of the Canadian Creepies family, you get an exclusive deal. Use code Canadian Creepies at checkout for 10% off. Find them lurking on Instagram, Etsy, and Poshmark. Links are in the episode description. Give your wardrobe a second chance at life, if you dare.
Her body, prepared with care, was sent back to France for burial. The absence of her head was a wound that never healed, a symbol of the violence that had reached even the most sacred corners of their lives. The men responsible were never identified, and no justice was ever served. Almost immediately after Sister Marie's body was sent back to France, whispers began to circulate through the settlement. People spoke of a figure seen walking the wooded path near the cove, the same route Sister Marie had taken each night to visit the sick and deliver supplies. At first, it was dismissed as grief playing tricks on the eyes, but the sightings continued. One evening, a local man was returning from the river when he noticed someone emerging from the forest. The figure wore a nun's habit, its hem brushing the ground, its posture unmistakably familiar. He called out, expecting a neighbor or perhaps one of the returning sisters. But as he drew closer, the figure turned slightly, and he saw, with chilling clarity, that it had no head. Frozen with fear, he watched as the apparition stood motionlessly, and then it began to walk towards the lake. A moment later, a voice, thin, distant, and hollow, echoed through the trees. "Where is my head?" He fled, stumbling through the brush and root, not stopping until he reached the safety of his home. He told the story to anyone who would listen, and though some dismissed it as panic or imagination, others admitted they too had seen something. A flicker of movement in the woods, a shadow near the water, a presence that lingered long after the air had gone still. From that night on, the path was avoided after dark. Children were warned not to wander near the cove, and even the most skeptical elders walked with lanterns in prayer. Sister Marie's legacy remained one of the most compassionate and courageous, but her final moments and the mystery of what was lost became part of something else, something that refused to be buried. In the years that followed Sister Marie's death, her story passed from whispered memories to a persistent legend. The tragedy of her murder, her refusal to betray the community, the brutal decapitation, and the mystery of the missing head left a scar on the land that never quite healed. And as generations came and went, the tale grew roots in the soil of French Fork Cove. Locals began to speak of a figure wandering the woods at dusk, clothed in the flowing robes of a nun, her gait slow and deliberate, always headless, always silent, until she wasn't. Some claim to hear a voice carried on the wind, soft and sorrowful, asking, "Where is my head?" Others describe a sudden chill in the air, the flicker of lanterns, or the sound of footsteps trailing just behind them on the path. She became known as the Headless Nun of French Fork Cove. Some say she guards the treasure she died to protect, still bound to the secret she buried beneath the earth. Others believe she appears to warn travelers, especially those who stray too far from the trail or walk alone after dark. A few insist she's a restless spirit, tethered to the injustice of her death and the silence that followed. Even today, visitors to the cove report strange sightings, shadows moving through the trees, the rustle of robes with no figure in sight, or the feeling of being watched. Local guides tell her story with reverence, and some families still leave offerings near the old Covenant grounds, rosaries, coins, and handwritten prayers tucked into the roots of ancient trees. Whether ghost, guardian, or grief made manifest, Sister Marie's presence endures, not as a tale of terror, but as a reminder of sacrifice, of injustice, and of the strength of a woman who gave everything to protect those who had already lost too much. Though the story of Sister Marie has echoed through generations, it was local author and historian Doug Underhill who gave it permanence on the page. In his book, Miramichi, Tales Tall and True, Underhill compiled a collection of regional folklore, ghost stories, and historical accounts that shaped the cultural memory of New Brunswick. Among them, the legend of the Headless Nun stands out, not just for its eerie details, but for its roots in real colonial trauma. Underhill approached the tale with both curiosity and respect. He traced its origins to the mid-18th century, during the violent upheaval of the Acadian expulsion, and explored how Sister Marie's murder may have been tied to the valuables she protected. His work didn't claim to solve the mystery, but it did something arguably more important. It preserved it. By documenting the oral histories and local accounts, Underhill ensured that Sister Marie's story would not be lost to time or reduced to mere superstition. Today, Underhill's book remains a touchstone for those seeking to understand the region's haunted past. Through his lens, the Headless Nun is not just a ghost. She's a symbol of sacrifice, injustice, and the power of memory. Tourism has latched on to the legend of Sister Marie in a way that's hard to ignore. Every summer, groups walk the trails at French Fort Cove, led by guides in costumes retelling the story of the Headless Nun. It's part ghost tour, part local theater, kind of the thing that sells out fast and ends with people buying merch. They call it the Headless Nun experience. It's scripted, a route, and a punchline. Tickets are sold per head. It's easy to see why it works. The story has everything: mystery, murder, treasure, and a ghost. But when you strip away the performance, you're left with something more complicated. A nun who was killed, a community that never found her head, and a legend that has been commercialized into a night out. Some locals roll their eyes, others say it keeps the story alive. Either way, it's become part of the landscape there, not just the woods, but the economy. And whether you believe in ghosts or not, it's hard to walk those trails at night and not feel like something's watching. See Sister Marie as a symbol of colonial violence. Her story unfolds in a time when European power was carving up territory, imposing systems, and silencing resistance. Whether she's protecting treasure, sacred knowledge, or simply refusing to comply, her murder becomes a metaphor for the erasure of voices deemed inconvenient. A woman of faith caught in between loyalty and survival, punished for standing firm. In that reading, her missing head isn't just a gruesome detail. It's a symbol of how colonial systems severed people from their identities, their autonomy, and their histories. Others interpret her as a religious martyr, a nun who chose her vows over her life. That framing leans into themes of sacrifice and spiritual conviction. It casts her as someone who believed in something bigger than herself and paid the ultimate price for it. But even that narrative is complicated. Was her death truly about faith, or was it about power? And who had it, who wanted it, and who stood in the way? There's also the ideals of female resistance, a woman who refused to yield, who didn't give up the treasure, who didn't betray her principles, and who didn't run. In a world where women were often expected to be silent, obedient, and invisible, Sister Marie's defiance stands out. Her story becomes a kind of protest, one that echoes through time, even when the details are blurred. Folklore doesn't offer clean answers. It offers layers. And the legend of the Headless Nun is full of them. She's a ghost, yes, but she's also a canvas, a figure unto which generations have projected fear, reverence, guilt, and curiosity. Today, her story is retold in night tours and local theater. It's printed on brochures, whispered in classrooms, and debated in living rooms. But beneath all of that, there's still something unresolved. A woman who died violently, a mystery that was never solved, and a community that continues to ask, what does it mean to remember her? Is it about honoring the past, confronting it, or simply keeping it alive? There's something about a missing head that sticks. It's not just gruesome, it's symbolic. In folklore, the head is more than a body part. It's identity, it's voice, it's memory. And to lose it is to be silenced in the most complete way. And yet, Sister Marie's story hasn't gone quiet. It's been retold, reshaped, and reinterpreted for generations. Her absence speaks volumes, not just about her, but about the histories we've left behind, unresolved, unspoken, and sometimes deliberately forgotten. She reminds us that haunting isn't always about ghosts. Sometimes it's about the way past lingers in the present, asking to be acknowledged, not feared, not buried, but faced. So maybe it's fitting that her legend has no head, because it forces us to think, to question, to remember. And if we're lucky, maybe that's how we move forward, by keeping our heads and not losing sight of the story that still needs telling. Thanks for joining me on this eerie journey through Canada's darker corners. If you love this episode of Canadian Creepies, be sure to follow Valerie on Instagram and TikTok at Canadian Creepies. She's the one behind the socials, sharing behind-the-scenes stories, creepy photos, and sneak peeks of upcoming episodes. And if you're craving even more haunted history and twisted folklore, be sure to check out my other podcast, Down the Crooked Path. You can follow the show on Instagram and TikTok for even more haunted history, mythical madness, and spine-tingling storytelling. Come say hi, share your own creepy encounters, and help us keep the weird alive. Until next time, stay curious and stay creepy.
That was an eerie journey down the crooked path with Amanda. How cool was that? If you loved it, don't forget to follow Down the Crooked Path on Instagram and TikTok. Amanda shares some really fun interactive content over there, and trust me, it gets even creepier. Down the Crooked Path is our sister podcast, and you can catch new episodes every Thursday wherever you get your podcasts. So if you're into the paranormal, folklore, and strange little corners of the world, we've got you covered.